Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. Okay, my name is Jane Wyatt. I'm the project manager of the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom, based in Leipzig, Germany. I'm very pleased to welcome you to Difference Day, celebrating World Press Freedom Day with the help of UNESCO. And they've made a short video, which we're now going to watch before we proceed with the debate. That's an inspiration and a very good scene setter for the subject of our debate now. And I'm very, very honoured indeed to be chairing this panel of very distinguished journalists and fact-checkers. I believe the reason why I'm here is because at the Fundamental Rights Association colloquium in November, I stoutly refused to accept that we live in a post-truth era. And I still do. I still believe in truth, and personally speaking, this is not my official ECPMF policy, but I hope it soon will be. I believe that quality journalism is an answer to the fake news, the lies, the propaganda, the menaces that we have that stand in the way of deeper trust from the public, trust, affection, respect for the journalistic profession. And I think we have some really good examples of the journalistic profession here on the platform to help us debate that very question. So I'm going to start with Melissa Bell. I'm going to go around the panel and just ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and your work, and then we'll come back to you for some more in-depth case studies based on your own journalistic experiences in recent days. Melissa.
My name is Melissa Bell. I'm CNN's Paris correspondent, and CNN has really been, over the course of the last few months, as a result of all that's happened, sort of at the on the front line of this debate. Oh, sorry. Yes, I needed to switch it on. Sorry, my name is Melissa Bell. I'm CNN's Paris correspondent, and obviously, for the last few months, we've been involved in a battle, really, over the question of truth and facts, and what is real and what is not, and whether there are facts and whether there is truth, and the role that journalists play faced with not just the proliferation, the fact that we've seen more and more of these sorts of fake news coming out, but also that the idea that there can be alternative facts and that there can be alternative visions and that, you know, we live in a world of intellectual relativism and that's okay is now coming from the White House. And so, in a sense, we've been obliged to take on this battle. And I think one of the points I want to make today is that actually this can be good news because it means that I think the result, at least in the United States, has been that it reinvigorates the media and it obliges it not to do its job better, but to do it more transparently. So to do its job the way it always has, but to explain perhaps better what it's done. And our experience has certainly been that CNN carried out the biggest study it ever carried of its kind in January to look at how the brand was being affected by the almost daily attacks coming from Washington on its credibility. And the finding was that to the public, its credibility had never been so strong. So on the contrary, far from having its authority doubted, it's come to have it reinforced, not because it's doing its job differently, but because the fact that it's doing its job has been perhaps better explained, better highlighted, and I think that in the end, quality journalism has been shown to be the answer, actually, to what we're seeing. So,
thank you. Peter.
Thank you. Well,
would you like to just introduce yourself and your project?
Yes. So I sort of have two hats, really, I guess, at this discussion. One is that, so I've worked for 25 years for the AFP news agency in different parts of the world. In 2012, working with a South African university, we set up a project called Africa Check, which has brought independent fact-checking to 4 African countries to date, in South Africa, Senegal, Nigeria, and Kenya. As part of that role, I became involved with a thing called the International Fact-Checking Network. I now chair their board. That was set up last year at the Poynter Institute in Florida, and brings together something like 40 organizations which have signed a code of, agreed to abide by a code of principles that we've set out for how the fact-checking organizations can work in a way that is transparent. As Melissa was saying, the incredible importance of transparency around the work that we do, to enable the public and to work with, to enable the public to understand what level of confidence they can have in the claims that they see on social media, in the media, and in the mouths of politicians. And then working with media partners in the 4 countries we work with, working with training students, working with training school children, to understand how to better assess the accuracy of claims that are made. So that's broadly what we do.
Thank you. Now over to Alain. Please introduce yourself, Alain Lelemont.
Hi, so I'm working for Le Soir here in Brussels, in the Daily, and basically my job today is try to develop the investigative journalism in international network. So you could think, oh, that's great, that's nice. Panama Papers, football leaks with Mediapart, or things like that, that's nice. But we have also our threat in terms of fake news. It means that when you receive 18 million documents, you just say, whoa, that's great. It's a whistleblowers, it must be sacred document, just nice. So what if some of those documents were faked? What if there was some black ops from a private detective office or from one of our intelligence services? So you have to look not only at the data, you have to confirm the data on the ground with human source, what the spy would call HUMINT. And the other thing you have to do is look at the metadata in order to make sure that you're not fucked off by, let's say, some black operation. So, okay. Quality journalism for sure is an answer, but we also have to find new quality journalism answer to fake news. That's something really hard, and we are just trying now to understand how we can collectively make sure that we don't propagate fake news or distortion or black ops to the other newsroom we're working with.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Edouard Plenel. I am the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Mediapart. It's an online, independent, participatory French media. We created Mediapart 9 years ago. For this debate, I think when we create Mediapart, we want to fight in the digital world for a new relationship, a new relation of trust, of confidence between public and journalism. Because our democratic crisis is also a crisis of trust between journalism and the public. What's mean reply to that? First, defend the value of journalism. When we create Mediapart, everywhere in the world, people think, and also professionals think, that information must be free in the digital area, on internet. We fight for the value. It's not only an economic, a commercial battle. It's a professional and a democratic battle. Quality journalism got a value. It's the price of democracy. And that's the first point for us. The second point is the independence. The value of journalism is also the loyalty, the utility of journalism. That means journalism will bring information of public interest for the people, for they can be free and self-governed. That means information about the powers, about the economic, the political powers. Investigative journalism is not a excuse my bad English and my awful accent, a specialization in our profession. For me, it's the center, it's the earth. Create more value. The public got many information free now. We must fight to say, you come to my media because there is a more value information, a more useful information. And the best value is the democratic one. Last point. The question, fake news, alternative facts, post-truth, it's not the post-Brexit or post-Trump debate. It's a debate for all of us. In France, you know, it's next Sunday. We got an extreme right, racist, xenophobia organization that's the National Front. It's only liars. It's only propaganda. It's really the denegation of all the reality, the truth of facts. There is no truth of facts, only ideology. And the battle, it's not only about the truth, it's about the democracy. Journalists cannot be spectators at this time. Mediapart, we reveal all the hard information about the National Front, about the link with Russia and the Putin regime, about the European Parliament and they take public money for employment which are not real. And just now we reveal new information about Syria and Daesh. It's a cynical organization, a fascist one, a neo-fascist or post-fascist one. The battle by the information, by the truth of facts, it's a battle for democracy. And we can win a new trust, confidence, a new relationship with the public if we are, as journalists, in this battle for democracy. Last word. In 1967, Hannah Arendt, a European, she came from Germany, and she was in United States. She published on the New Yorker an article, an essay, which is for me the best reflection about our challenge. Now, the title is Truth and Politics. She explained, and it was 50 years before all the social network, all the rumors, all the fake news, all the blah, blah, blah of the TV show, like Fox News, the infotainment, and so on. She explained, we have, all of us, we have two sorts of truth. We have our truth of opinion, conviction, origin, good opinions or very dangerous opinion. But she said, if there is only this sort of truth, my opinion against your opinion, that means very quickly my origin, my faith, and so on against you. There is no common word. Democracy, the challenge, and it's a problem of culture, not only of institution. It's our responsibility, individual responsibility. It's to put in the center of the opinion debate truth of facts, factual truth. And that's the reason why journalists, we are in the day to say that. In Turkey, in Moscow, in the White House now, and also in Paris, in front of the national fronts and authoritarian, identitarian, unequal movement or power. That's the reason journalism is the first enemy for this power. Because we are at the service of the public service for this truth of facts. The relationship with the reality. And if we accept that on the social network, on the TV show, there is only blah, blah, blah of opinion, there is no, I repeat, common word. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've touched there, Edwy, on some of the difficulties that you're facing in covering the current French election. And of course, Melissa, you two are in the thick of it there in Paris. Can I just pass the microphone back to you? And perhaps you could give some examples of how perhaps an atmosphere has developed during this election campaign that's made it more difficult for you to pursue quality journalism.
I think what Edwy said is absolutely right. And you mentioned the central place that investigative journalism plays. And it's true, I think for a long time, perhaps Mediapart is an exception because you've existed for the last 9 years and you saw this coming, as did you. But I think many of us were guilty of kind of falling asleep at the wheel and feeling that we were part of a consensus and that everyone accepted that there were facts and that we would never, in a sense, have to fight so publicly for what it was we were doing, hence the need for transparency that I mentioned a moment before. So for years, we all relied on access journalism. That's now changed because all journalism, whether you're covering the White House or anything else, becomes investigative journalism. And it's about, going back to the point that you made, the internal structures that you have in place to ensure that your journalism, your reporting is at the level where it can not only be defended, but entirely trusted because you've put the internal checks in place. Just one broad point before I turn to the French election, picking up on what you both said. The great fortune we had at CNN was that about 20 years ago, we really screwed up on a thing called Tailwind, which was an investigation into an operation that had taken place in Vietnam, and CNN's investigation, whilst never being disproved, was found to have flaws in it that once it was put under the scrutiny of congressional committees simply didn't stand up. The journalists in question had to go. As a result, CNN set up what it calls triad systems. So every time you file a report, whether it's a package or you do a live, where even in the rush of breaking news, you're given by your sources, very credible sources, some piece of information, you have to send it back to Atlanta, and it goes through 3 levels of verification. A first one, a legal one, and a standards and practices one. And the result is that we're not as fast often as you'd like to be, because as a journalist, you're bursting to get the information out there, especially if you're convinced that it's true. But it's in a way, it's a way of counterbalancing what is a natural instinct. So we had the good fortune of having that in place when all this happened, and suddenly it became absolutely crucial to be able to say, look, this is how we do things, and this is why you can trust what we put out there, because it's been checked on so many different levels that you can believe it. In the case of France, to come back to the French election, we are faced with the difficulty of having to, on a day-to-day basis, try to put aside, and I think this has been the lesson of Brexit and of Trump's victory, to put aside what are our beliefs, what are our natural inclinations as human beings, what we think is true and not true, what we think is fair and not fair, what we believe history has taught us, where we stand politically. And again, that consensus, which we had imagined being eternal and the end of something, has proved much more fragile than we'd expected. And so I think we're confronted, and I feel this very much day to day, with the necessity of putting aside what you think in order to concentrate absolutely on what is factual and what is not in dealing with the various candidates that are presenting themselves. And I think it's a difficult challenge to rise to, but I think it's all the more important because if you don't rise that challenge yourself, then you are playing the game of the populists, and you fall into the trap of being able to be accused of fake news, which is why you have to be. There's no more room for error. That's the point. Is that you can no longer. Put your opinions out there. You can no longer make mistakes in your journalism because you will be pounced upon, and credibility takes, a lifetime to build up, seconds to lose. And I think we don't have the luxury of making mistakes anymore. And so it's better to be slow, it's better to be sure, it's better to have, triple-checked your sources and gone through all the levels of verification so that you know that once you're saying what you're saying, it's absolutely cast iron. And I think that's the challenge of the moment. And as it was in Britain, as it was in the United States, as it is in France now, being tested on a daily basis, getting to the bottom of the facts without letting your own opinions get in the way of your journalism. And I think that's the particular challenge that populists pose us.
And do you feel intimidated by the populists, by political groups who are perhaps trying to influence your coverage?
I think what I've noticed, and I'll be curious to hear what you all have to say, I think there is a new level of aggression against journalists which we simply didn't feel before, because the internet gives them access, because the populist narrative is that the media are, not a democratic, informal institution, but rather an enemy of the people, and so on and so forth. You find almost day to day, when you've actually just put out a piece of journalism that's been fact-checked, that's absolutely solid, a level of attack, personal attack, that I think is quite hard to deal with. Not necessarily from the political parties, but from sympathizers. That's new. That's new.
When you say personal attack, do you mean physically or
online?
I know
in writing. I mean, sometimes they'll come up and abuse you in person, but I don't remember that happening before.
And this has taken a very tangible form. I know with you at Mediapart, you've received a bullet.
Yes,
and a death threat.
Recently, but during the last 6 years, the National Front decided to ban Mediapart journalists from all their public event. You understand? Public event. They want our votes. It's a public event. All media from all political sensibilities, it's open. It's the free democracy. We are banned. We cannot go physically in their meeting. Second point, the very, very courageous journalist who wrote until now, all the articles about the National Front, Marine Turkey, she goes to a local building of this organization, and a group of militants, where the guy from the first circle of Mrs. Le Pen, they arrive physically against her. They say, "We will kill you. We will go to your home, to your address," and so on. It's two examples. But there is also, and that was your point, there is the National Front. But we know all the racist, xenophobic, authoritarian forces, they don't grow up naturally. The question is how the rightist democratic, the leftist democratic, organize or not a serious barrage, a serious barrage, out of the word? Barricade, a serious barricade. The right during this campaign What's our revelation about a corruption affair concerning the rightist candidate? Why they do what they do? They create a sort of mobilization against media. Against media. During their meeting, they say they cried against media. That's mean for me not against the profession, against democracy. And the voters, there is no rightist candidate now. But what will arrive? They will vote for the extreme right. That's the responsibility in all our countries. That was the problem during the Brexit. They organized the Brexit and finally, who win? And that's the same question for the leftist organization about the question of racism, of discrimination. Reflection, 2 seconds. In France now there is many people for social reason, because there is a big social crisis, a big crisis of trust from politics and so on. They say, a democratic candidate, it's a banker. It's from finance. It's the same that the racist candidate. No racist, no banker, no racist, no banker. It's the same. Liberal democracy, even unequal, even with, but you can fight. You can organize demonstration. You can take revelation. It's not the same if, especially in a monarchy like France, a real monarchy, if the power is taken by an extremist organization, an authoritarian organization, with a sort of a policy of lying, or a policy of ideology. Yesterday, one of the dirigents of the National Front, he was questioned about why you ban Mediapart. He replied, they are spying. It's not journalism. You know, spying, that means agent from foreign country. They are not national. They are against our country. That's words. That's not only words. That's a violence in our democratic culture. And that's the reason for me there is no bargain. We must unite against that.
And there has been a spread. I think Edwy puts his finger on something that's been really interesting, was to watch the party of de Gaulle, to watch them fall into this new populism. It's been extraordinary. And I've heard, perfectly upstanding members of the Republican Party say to me, in any case, you, the media, you're biased, and it's a plot against Fillon. And you would say, but you're suggesting then that the judiciary is not independent in France. They would say, yes, it's not independent. And I would say, well, that means that we're no longer living in a democracy. Can you hear yourself speak? And I think there's been a spread of that kind of paranoia, which has infested even the parties which before would never have gone to that level of hysteria. And that's dangerous. And the best fight against it is the kind of solid journalism that allows you to stand by your facts, perhaps with a new kind of belligerence, maybe one that we hadn't known before, that wasn't necessary. But it is, I think, in the end, more of a battle than it was. Not for this side or that side, but for the idea that there is truth and there are facts and they can be proven.
There's an idea which has been tried out, perhaps this might be an idea also for the French media, in my local region in Germany. I live in Leipzig, and MDR TV decided that they would meet head-on these accusations that the media are an elite, they tell lies, they, what you described it as before as the accepted consensus is not accepted by a section of the community in East Germany. And so some of our colleagues from MDR TV invited in to their studios 2 members of Pegida, the anti-Islamic, anti-immigration citizens movement, as they call themselves, so that they could spend the day alongside the reporters, covering day-to-day news about politics and watching how they do fact-checking, where they get their trusted sources. how the editorial decisions are made, which pictures to use, and so on and so on, and really playing a full part behind the scenes at MDR TV in making, I think it was something like an 8-minute feature for the evening news the following day. And that was a revelation to those two people. Sadly, it went no further, and the accusations of lying press and the attacks, physical attacks, and also cyber mobbing continue, especially in East Germany, but also across the whole of the rest of Germany. You can see details of it on our story map. That's on the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom website. It's just been updated today for World Press Freedom Day. It's a sad story, but at least we are showing solidarity with our journalistic colleagues and the camera crews who've been beaten up, who can't go out to cover a demonstration now without personal security guards, bodyguards. So not only in France, also in Germany, we too are feeling this new sense of aggression against journalists and finding that quality journalism in itself is not really enough to defend our reputation. And I can well imagine, Peter, that in Africa, in the 4 countries in Africa that you're scrutinizing, there's probably a similar kind of antagonism, is there, to journalists?
Well, the media context in Africa is so first of all, it's not the same in all the countries. Secondly, it is very different. In 3 out of the 4 countries that we work in, you don't have the same sort of political context that you have in most European countries, in most Western countries, of a left-right, classic sort of left-right split. I mean, I lived in Nigeria for 5 years. Parties are associations of people seeking power. They're not organizations that pursue an ideological line. I mean, I remember I was there when military rule ended, and a party had to present its manifesto to the Electoral Commission by a particular deadline on a particular day. There was a split in this particular party, so the 2 parties presented precisely, word for word, the same manifesto. Just one of them had the words Alliance for Democracy scratched out and All People's Party put in. And so the political context of the country is different. And the way that media organizations tend in many countries either to be the plaything of the state or the plaything of media owners. And so there's tremendous distrust of the media, and very often fairly. And it's not necessarily because of the ideological bent of the organization. So, I mean, I think just to pick up on a couple of things, what we first of all, it occurred to me that we're talking about a debate, and I'm in the unfortunate position to try to make an interesting debate of agreeing with most of what people are saying. So, you talked about not liking the word post-truth. I loathe the phrase post-truth. We do not live in a post-truth world. We live in a post-trust world, if we want to live in a post-something world. There are all manner of studies that show that since the 1950s onwards, trust in all sorts of institutions, it is the media, but not only the media, is declining for all sorts of complex reasons. And I think that the most important thing that media can do, and that fact-checking organizations can do, and it perhaps speaks to the experiment you're talking about in Germany, is to try to take readers in to the process, to show you're working out. As my son goes through school, and his maths teacher says, listen, I don't believe that you got to that answer unless I can see you're working out. And so that's for fact-checking organizations, we now have I think it's 16 or 17 organizations that have been verified as living up to the code of principles that we introduced. And one of those principles is being transparent about your sources, and another one is being transparent about your methodology. And when we do studies, and we've done a lot of studies into whether organizations trust us whether our audiences trust us as an organization, it's whether they can follow the methodology that you're applying. And so that's something that CNN does well. It's something that, as I understand, Mediapart does well. And it's where you take readers, listeners, whoever they are in, and say, this is how we came to this conclusion. This is the degree of confidence that we have. Because things tend not to come down to true and false. In some cases, they do. But in the great majority of cases, they're somewhere in between. And we're not about finding the truth. We're about narrowing areas of uncertainty. There's what we know, and there's what we. It's almost Rumsfeldian. You know, what do you know that you what you know that you don't know, and the unknown unknowns, and all of that. You're trying to narrow down the areas of uncertainty, and you do that, and that's in a highly political but far less ideological context, which is the context in Nigeria, Kenya, and Senegal, for example. That's still the basic principle of seeking trust through openness is universal. So
not an absolute truth, but 60%, something like that.
Yes, it's about saying, we know the world. We know the world is round. I almost said we know the world is flat. So we know, honestly, it really is. So we know the world is round. We know that it was raining when Mr. Trump was inaugurated, whatever he says. We know there are some things that we know. We know gravity and all of it. There are many things that we know, and there are other things that we know with degrees of certainty. And if you're open and honest about that, if you're open and honest about the processes that you come to find to make your conclusion, about your financing, about all these different areas that people are suspicious of, then when you do the studies, the snap response of most people is journalists all over the world can't be trusted. And then you look into, the trust in the BBC has never been higher. I mean, you were saying trust in CNN. So when people actually do, the knee-jerk answer, do you trust journalists? No. But when you say, no, but actually I trust that one, and I trust that organization, and so on, and people are more nuanced than we, in fact, often report ourselves.
And I think your point about a degree of humility is an important one. So it's important also to say what you don't know. One example, if I may, is just a few months ago we were confronted with the famous Russian dossier that allegedly involved things that had happened to Donald Trump while he was in Russia. Now, when this all came out, CNN broke the story, but reported what it had been able to get past the triad system that I mentioned a moment ago. So its journalists based in Washington had managed, by speaking to their various sources, and it took several, running the information they'd collected past through the triad system, they'd managed to ascertain that there did indeed exist a dossier that had been compiled by a former operative at the request of Republicans during the primary process to get to the bottom of what dirt there existed on Donald Trump. It's long, bear with me. And then what was inside the dossier, however, which BuzzFeed went on to publish in the name of transparency, but perhaps foolishly, because you couldn't, by definition, know what was inside the dossier, because the alleged contents of the dossier, which involved tapes which would have been in the hands of the Russians, would have been almost impossible to have any of your sources have seen. So the contents of the dossier were almost unverifiable from the point of view of Western news organizations. And so I think it was an example of how you can report things with a degree of humility. Say, this is what we know. We know that there is this dossier that contains these allegations, but the allegations themselves were not reportable because we had no way of knowing whether or not they were true. And I think it's another reminder of the fact that there are things that you can check, there are things that you can't know, but it doesn't prevent you, I think, with a certain degree of humility and caution, reporting what is reportable and moving the story along as far as you can. It doesn't mean you can move it along all the way, but you can open the door to what follows, and I think that's important. But again, it comes down to being absolutely certain of having checked things for yourself, not relying on what the operative found. It was what we were able to find from our sources about what existed and what did not. So therefore, it was our own journalism. So, for instance, the question of one of the questions that's often asked is whether news organizations can rely on what agencies say. Now, you long worked for agencies, and I think many news organizations did come to rely on agencies, perhaps more than they should have. Our rule is that. And we're very cautious about this, is that an agency, the Reuters, the AFP, might give you a lead, the information, but you don't report the information until you've found it out for yourself. And I think, again, it comes back to that question of rigor. And I think that news organizations, all of them, in order to get that level of trust, need to go through this sometimes painful process of just thinking, that's an amazing piece of news, but we can't touch it with a barge pole until we've run it through our own systems and found it out for ourselves. So, again, I think it raises our game further still.
Yes, good. Showing our working out, more transparency, inviting the right-wing populists into the newsroom. These all sound like very fine ideas, but if you've got a long-running investigation that involves sources who must be kept confidential for their own safety, can we really expect the reading public of Le Soir to want to follow every little twist and turn in a long-running investigation, for example, like Kazakhgate, which you have been working on, I think, for about 16 years, is it?
Yeah, but maybe it's more easy for the whole audience to understand how we could have those security measures for something that is widely known, like the Panama Papers, let's say. Panama Papers, 450 journalists working secretly. How do you do to make sure that nobody is putting in the pattern of investigation a fake news that would destroy the whole credibility of the investigation? And furthermore, because we were working, for example, with an African of Madagascar, well, I was really happy to assist him in protecting his data, but we had to take special disposition in order for him to be able to join the investigation, because it's important to have national Africans that are embedded in the investigation. But how do you rely on him not to be the targets of intelligence services and have a good protection, blah, blah, blah. So it's difficult. So the problem is, how do you do to make sure that nobody within the team of 450 is making black ops or dirty business? So you have to have a procedure for overlap, for double check, triple check of every information, every document, and no document is sacred. So you have to check the facts, even if they are put on a document. So that's something you would avoid to communicate with the readers. But at the end, you have to explain to the readers what you did, what was the procedure. And you have to give them, most of the time, as far as you can, access to the raw data and the document. Because that's the same reflex that you had inviting far right in the studio, is showing to the readers, look, we say something, we don't want you to believe us as journalists. We just show you the box of evidence we have, and you make your own opinion, and you will have a guided tour of what you could think of those documents with us. We are here to double check those documents. We are here to give you an understanding of those pieces of evidence, but you're always free to say, okay, I do not agree with the newspaper, or I do not agree with the journalist. So that's one point in order to understand the challenge, global challenge. On Kazakhgate today in Belgium, what is really amazing is to see that we don't have only fake docs. We have now the private detective offices coming from Israel, coming from London, trying to influence the journalist, trying to influence the elected people that are doing the investigation at the parliament. We have private offices that try to have an inside view in your document, on your hard disk, hard drive. So you're in front of, let's say, private intel movement. And there's also a lot of disinformation, some criminals that are opening doors, trying to get contact directly with elected people or with journalists, trying to influence the work you've been doing. So We are working, fighting on different fronts, and this is very classical. This is something that brings you back to Cold War episode. But here, because we're in a file where you have a connection to the French presidency, you have a connection to the Belgian parliament, you have a connection to a state, Kazakhstan, you have a connection to Moscow interest in Kazakhstan, so you have also state operators that are doing black ops. So at some moment you just need to make sure, and even working with the other newsroom, working with the competitors, and just call the competitors and say, listen, let's gather in the surrounding of one of our newsroom. Let's share the information we have. Let's collaborate in order to be stronger, because the attacks are really there, are really crucial for us to counter. So that's it. That's what we are living in now. And I think it's already difficult to explain to the readers what are the scandals. Now, it's also very difficult to explain to the readers what we are resisting to in, let's say, the backyards of those scandals. We did in June with Mediapart. We were here in Belgium, in Mechelen, and we had a gathering, and Mediapart came with a new dossier and said, listen, we have a few pages here. We think it may be false document, but we want to study that with you. And we were some 15 newsroom. It was really new as an approach from Mediapart, saying, I don't have a whistleblowers only. I have a whistleblower, he's giving me documents, but I think those documents are fake. Can we work together in order to establish a level of confidence in the document? And so we took all the data that was in the document, and we tried to double check every bank account. Does it exist? Who is the real beneficial owner of that bank account? Can we find any track of that banking operation? Blah, blah, blah. And after one month, we said, okay, we have some gaps, some fake banking account. So we say, okay, these whole bunch of documents for us are fake. Can we try to understand why we had those fake documents? Who is sending that false information to us? What is the target? What is so we just swallow with humility the fact that we could be the target of false information. And 2 months after, we did another meeting on the same topic, saying, this time we think we have the good information, reliable, and we're still working on it now. But now we know that somebody tried to mislead us in that field of investigation, so we are very, very careful. But that's now a daily obligation we have, just to make sure that every document is grounded, that no information has been redacted. That's really we have a new strength with those networks. Let's say that we have now new threats.
Thank you. Would it be possible, I appreciate this is going to be very difficult for you, just for those of us who haven't followed all the twists and turns of the Kazakhgate scandal, to just tell us step by step how it goes, how it hangs together?
You just don't want to know. You want to eat before that. No.
You must read Le Soir and Mediapart.
Of course, we will all go and read Le Soir and Mediapart. But no, there's kind of a serious point behind my question, which is that actually I feel, having spent a lot of my life working in commercial local radio in the United Kingdom, that actually a large section of our public finds quality journalism boring. They can't be bothered, actually, to read all these intensely well-researched documents and so on and so forth. And maybe a part of regaining the trust is to rekindle the interest in the whole process of investigative journalism, because it is dangerous, full of threats and intimidations, bullets in the post, surely the story behind the story is something we should be more and more willing to tell to excite the public interest in what we're doing.
I do not agree, Jane. Look, let's have a French president, let's have a Belgian government, let's have agent of the intelligence services of France, of Belgium. Let's talk about Kazakh oligarchs. Let's talk about corruption. Let's talk about billions of dollars in military contract and million of euro in commission under the table. No, I'm sorry. We have the best polar you could dream of.
Yes, please.
Yes. I agree with Alain, and I do not agree with you, because on this point, are we boring? You understand? Our logo, we take it with graphism. It's like Web 2.0, but it was an old figures, an old drawing of the 19th century. It's a young guy, very popular in the street, with a newspaper, what we call in French, le crieur de journaux. Last edition, good news, come. What's that mean? As journalists, we must fight to create interest. We are not like teacher, serious, and the audience, they don't understand us. They are on the social network. They prefer to be on their mobile and so on. No, we are not upper. We are in this fight, in the street. Come to our information. First point. Second point, in the digital world, you can. It's the contrary. When we start Mediapart, we discover that there is no frame in the digital. It's not like the paper. Small article, very long article, many sort of frames. And also the multimedia, images, movies, and so on. And what we discovered, our investigation, it's very long articles. In Le Monde, where I was during 25 years, some articles from Mediapart, it's 2, 3, 4 pages. On the paper, you don't take it. It's boring, yes, on the paper. On internet, it's not boring. That's the reason of our success.
So the medium is
you fight, you use all the modernity to defend our tradition. There is 2 points on Alain, on his speech, his demonstration. First, a good investigation, it's like a puzzle. There is sometimes one big information, a big news, but you must know, and that was his explanation, you must know all the other pieces, even if you don't publish them. You must know more than what you publish. First puzzle. Second, and that's very important in the relation between with the whistleblower and so on. Journalism in the public interest is not an individual adventure. It's a collective work. The first checking, it's my colleague. It's this sort of meeting we organize. It's this sort of discussion. One word more about, let's say, Peter, the post-trust and not the post-truth area. Also, for the digital, it's a technological revolution. We must take it. We must take it and organize the battle for the best democratic and journalistic tradition. When you are on the paper, it's a closed thing. And the public, the audience, it's not there. Okay, you don't know what arrives. A media on the digital world, it's inevitably participatory, in a participative reaction. We are in discussion with our public, our readers. They can criticize us. They can discuss about our information, then and that's a very important point for me. In the crisis of our profession, and that's the reason of the place more and more of investigative. It's finished for us to be sort of teacher of conscience for the reader. It's finished because they can express on their blogs, on their social network, their opinion. They don't need our microphone, our authorization to publish their opinion. And that's a good news for journalism. I got opinion, like you, okay. But my work is not to produce my opinion. My first work is to find information. And I insist, because in the infotainment world, in the battle, how they create audience? They make talk show of opinion. And to make a big audience, there is a guy or woman who say very bizarre, very strange things. Obama is not American. There was a Muslim agent, I don't know. Plenel, it's a CIA agent. I heard that. 30 years before, I was a KGB agent. You know. Okay, that changed.
Yeah.
Okay, and you understand, it's not in our profession, the question of investigative journalism, of quality journalism, of investigative journalism as an example for quality journalism, is also the demonstration that we must have a battle against us. Against us, our job, our mission is not provide opinion to the public, it's provide information.
If I could, Jay, just pick up on what Edwy said, I think another good point is that, for a long time, there was this idea that the big newspapers, the media was declining because internet was this massive threat. Actually, digital, as you say, provides extraordinary possibilities, not just to kind of tell stories in more innovative ways, to have the exchange that you talk about quite rightly, but also to measure the interest. I mean, we now measure the clicks on our stories, and the interest generated by, say, for CNN Digital, the big political scoops of the last few months have blown all the records. So I think the idea that people are not interested was an idea that maybe 20 years ago news executives had, but I think it's being disproven by the facts.
Good. Well, I hope you're right.
We demonstrate it. We are a success story. Why?
Yeah.
We are not smart or more intelligent. There is a demonstration. And I think our profession, and also politics, and guys and women who make reflection about that, must look at this sort of laboratory. Why it's work? Why?
Now, I'm very old. And you, my dear colleagues on the platform, are also not the youngest. This morning in our World Cafe, I was reliably informed by some much younger people that what they call MSM, mainstream media, are not to be trusted, are not liked by young people. Millennials don't do MSM. They get their news through other sources. So now I'd like to throw open the floor, and that's one of the things that I would like you to address. Also going back to what Melissa just said about clicks and political scoops going viral and so on. Is there a sense in which we can change the algorithms now and train the algorithms to produce quality, trustworthy journalism in a way that will carry the younger generation with us to back up what we've heard? And also, just to be devil's advocate in a little kind of way, another accusation that's leveled at MSM is they're all the same, they're part of a club, they're an elite. And when you talk about cross-border collaborations, what I think someone this morning from Harvard Business School called competition, horrible word, competition and cooperation going together, so basically working with your rivals. Of course, it was fantastic that the Panama Papers grew up in this way. It's working very successfully for Kazakhgate investigation. But if we are really all working together, then market forces, competition, diversity and plurality of viewpoints are going to be lost, surely, because we'll all be on the same story and we'll be working to help each other, not to beat each other to the truth, to prove that we have better quality journalism than the competition. You can see here that I've grown up with British tabloid journalists. But I do think that's a valid point, that perhaps some younger people now in the audience, also not to be ageist, the older ones can have their say as well. Lara's got a roving mic. Please, let's see who's got something to say.
Okay.
Thank you very much. You were mentioning information and gathering information. I think key question here is also, there was a great French author, Paul Valéry, who wrote in 1919, La crise de l'esprit, the crisis of the human spirit. And it's like it was written today. So when you want to engage people, shouldn't we also reflect the business model of the human being? Who are we, and what are we doing here? Are we living for ourselves, or are we living for other people together? And a lot of people are mentioning, let's do it together. But what does that mean? If you don't do it from the soul and from the heart, only from the mind. So this is, I think, a much broader and much deeper crisis we are living. We are not living an economic crisis, not a social crisis. We are living the crisis of the human being, because in a couple of decades we will be 9 billion on the planet. So how are we going to deal with 9 billion people?
Thank you. And could you remind us of the author and your name too, please?
My name is András László. I was born in Budapest, but raised in Belgium, in Brussels. And the author is Paul Valéry, La crise de l'esprit, 1919. You can have it on Google. Everything is on Mrs. Google. You Google her, and she will tell you.
Thank you. Thank you for that contribution. Do we have any more?
Don't be shy.
Yes?
You're young.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Hello, I'm Oliver. I really like the debate. Thanks a lot for taking the time to do that. I think quality journalism is really a necessity. Like you said, there is no way to make mistakes now. It needs to be done perfectly. Another element I think is important is empathy. Is empathetic journalism that bridges the borders between the people who are not really reading liberal news, but finding a way that journalism can be delivered in a way that they understand and that they see you're actually having good intentions. Because for most of them, you're like, you have this leftist worldview. I cannot agree with anything you say, even though you might make it sound like that. So it's a process of empathetic journalism. It's important, I guess.
And how do you think that could become part of quality journalism? How can we show more empathy?
So, for example, the example you brought up with bringing people into the newsroom and showing them how it looks like, or writing articles that also put a focus on acknowledging the errors happening in journalism, the errors happening in the liberal bubble. So when you talk to Trump supporters, also not glorifying that Obama was such a great progressive president, but that there were things that you see that they are upset about, for example. So
I think that, if I may, that comes back to the humility point. Struggle with the microphones. It comes back to that humility point that, of course, fact-checking and quality journalism and standing up for what we know to be the fruit of our work and being able to stand by and defend it is crucial. But going back to a point that you were making, Jane, I think that even as that reaffirmation of what quality journalism is, I think as a result of the great diversity that digital offers, there is also, I think even the big old media structures have never had more diversity within them. Just one example, CNN launched a couple of years ago a thing called Great Big Story, and it didn't put its name on it because it didn't want to have that kind of big old CNN thing with it, but the idea is that it in very innovative digital ways, it tells stories visually and tries to go places that perhaps, you know, the rest of the network wouldn't go, and tell stories that haven't been told and reach out to parts of the public that haven't been reached out to before, and it's very effective. And I think the two can coexist. I think that there are innovative ways of reaching out with empathy and understanding and a desire to tell stories that haven't been told and points of view that haven't been expressed before, but it doesn't detract from the core fundamental of, in terms of the news, ensuring that what you're saying is true. And you're right, part of that is making absolutely sure that we put aside what are our own personal biases, which are inevitable as human beings. And one other thing, listening to it then, it came back to me. I think we've been talking about the importance of facts, but I think it's important not to lose sight of our mission, that the reason we need the weapon of truth and facts is that we are here for a reason, and it's not all neutral. There's a lovely phrase goes back to the very early 20th century, Finlay Peter Dunne, who was writing about the written press at the time, who said that the point of journalism is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And I think that in the end, the reason that you need quality journalism is that in the end, that is, I think, at the basis, at the bottom of what we all do. It's the reason we became journalists. And I think that that empathy question, without going into subjectivity, is essential. That you are telling the facts and you're getting to the bottom of something, but you're trying to do something as well, and that is constantly to challenge those who have too much power and to get the answers that those who have less power deserve. So there is a sense of mission in there as well, I think.
Yeah, I agree totally. For me, it was not necessarily about a conflict between both. Yes, no. It's a combination of both, and that's the hard part of it.
It is the hard part.
It's this fine line to hit. And yeah, thanks for your job. You're doing great stuff.
I think Peter wanted to come in on that one as well.
I mean, I think the point about empathy is a very good one. I spend way too much of my time trying to persuade donors to fund what we do, and I therefore have to come up with, and so where there's a lot of research done into the effectiveness of fact-checking work, and one of the, and so the question of whether somebody who reads what you write, where the conclusion that you reach in some way conflicts with their pre-existing belief, whether they change their belief to some degree, whether they accept your conclusions, is a question that's constantly asked. So there's been a lot of study done in all different sorts of fields, in education and others, into why people trust the information that they trust, and why has there been this massive growth in distrust. And one of the best arguments I've seen is that statistics are all wrong. The inflation that, I have no idea what the inflation rate is here, but so in whatever country you live in, the inflation rate that I am subject to, and that Melissa is subject to, and Edwin is subject to, everybody in the room is subject to, will be slightly different the one from the other, because the inflation of the price of this good is rising, the price of that good is falling. I don't buy that good, so that doesn't affect me in exactly the same way. When people you will see journalists, politicians talk about rising employment or falling employment, but all of those numbers are rounded out, and so none of those numbers, except to actually very rare people, will be precisely correct. So every time somebody stands up and gives a simple statistic, there's a little element of mistrust that falls into the mind of the reader, because look, that doesn't apply to me. You know, that may be averaged out over the however many million people it is in the population, that may be the right number, according to the statisticians, but that doesn't apply to me. And so mistrust builds. And I'll give you a precise little example of how I think that journalists, how fact checkers are trying to tackle that, and how journalists can try to tackle that, is to understand the lived experience of the people that you're communicating with, and to reflect that to some degree. And I'll give you a precise example is that President Zuma in South Africa stood up a little while ago and talked about the improvement of the electricity supply situation in South Africa. It's been controversial, so he made a big point of this in his State of the Nation address. We fact-checked his claim, and we said that it was broadly true. Electricity supply has increased. When we did, we got all sorts of abuse. So I must be so loaded because I'm in the pay of so many different organizations. I so wish it was true. So we were obviously in the pay of the ANC because everybody knows that it's got worse. And so the people who were all writing to us were all coming from one demographic. And they were the people who, in 1994, at the end of apartheid, they all had electricity, and electricity worked 100% of the time. And now for that community, electricity works probably 98 or 99% of the time, probably more. I haven't actually done those numbers. Because every once in a while, the power grid isn't functioning properly, so they give an announcement that there's going to be a shutting off of power. So when you talk to those people, and we did a big social media exercise to talk to those people, and they said, look, electricity is off all the time. I said, well, when you say all the time, well, every month. Okay, right, so every month for how, well, I mean, okay, so it's last month there was three hours on that day, and then, 6 weeks before there were 2 hours on that day. Right, so actually come down to, you get electricity 99-point-something% of the time. Now, electricity supply in South Africa reached 50% of the population at the end of apartheid, and now it's 87%. So 37% of the population has gone from 0 to 99 point whatever it is, and some people have gone from 100 to 99 point something. And so when you present it in that context and you say, look, if I simply say that your experience is wrong, that your understanding, look, your situation has got worse, marginally. But if I totally dismiss what you say, you simply won't believe me. But so it's that nuanced thing, recognizing the statistics are complex, and that's not because people are trying to cheat with them, but because it's very difficult to find something that will reflect the very complex reality that people live in. But to recognize that in some way in your which is super hard to do in 2.4 minutes and whatever it is in the typical radio piece or whatever it is. But recognizing that complex reality is, I think, one of the key elements to re-establishing trust.
Absolutely, and it goes right back to empathy as well, because if you have to think about the people for whom the electricity supply has changed and how and why. This is my truth, tell me yours. That's actually the title of my blog post on the Future Media Lab blog. If you've missed it, I do recommend that you take a look at it. It's also illustrated with some of my books, one of which is called Flat Earth News, another of which is called Aliens, Why Are They Here? And there are also some very well-researched, authoritative textbooks from media studies, journalism studies, which can point you in the right direction of speaking truth to power, which is, as I'm sure we all agree, the main fundamental purpose of quality journalism. I'm afraid now we're coming to the end of our session, but I just want to give the last word now to our two panelists who haven't had a last word yet. Was there anyone in the audience who's burning to say something? Burn away.
Well, I first want to say that I very much appreciate the experience that's in the panel. Although you said that MSM, mainstream media, are primarily criticized by the young, that actually is not true. In 1972, Gallup did a research in America, and 72% actually felt a great deal of trust or a fair amount of trust in media. In 2016, this was down to 32%. In Germany, in 2015, Infratest Demo poll showed that more than 60% of all Germans have little or no trust in media. So I'm afraid to say that whilst you have an extremely important role, because if we lose reliable information sources, our democracies will erode and ultimately disappear. But you are in greater difficulty, I'm afraid, than you think yourself. I actually very much appreciate what Peter said. It's not only about factual truth, or indeed the context, which is the other element. It is also about trust.
Yes.
The real challenge that you face is how do we restore trust in media? Because the things on internet that young people may follow because they know them, may be what friends say. But friends may not have the research to do the fact-checking. So whilst the trust may be there, I may not have the truth. And when you got the big media, well, I may not have the trust. So the core essence, the core problem that you need to face is how do we restore trust in media? And if the experienced people on the panel could comment on that more than on the truth, but on the trust aspects, I would very much appreciate that.
Last words. Trust. How do we build trust with quality journalism?
I do agree. I think we must be actor as journalists, not only spectator or professional. We must be actor in this time, because the question of the crisis of trust with the media, it's a crisis of representation. Politics representation, mediatic representation. It's a crisis of democracy. And I think our profession is linked to a democratic ideal. The right to know. The right to vote is nothing if there is no the right to know. If I can vote in Ankara, in Moscow, in Washington, in Paris, and other place in Africa, and I am blind, I don't know, I cannot choose, I can vote for my best enemy or my very, very sad future. The right to know is, for me, more important than the right to vote. And that's the reason we must be actor in a digital world where the young people, it's a world of knowledge, internet, not only of rumors. It's a world of for the free access to many knowledge about the past, about the present, about science, about culture. For me, it's not a difficulty. It's the chance for us to reinvent the original, in this world, ecosystem of journalism. And you are right. It's not only provide truth, it's create this ecosystem that create trust. Mediapart, why we invent this word? It's media participative. Participation, a relation between the journalists, our team, and our readers. And that's the way to win, to conquer not only economic, professional solution, but the place of journalism by this time. This question at the beginning about Paul Valéry, and the other question about how do you organize the link with the public. We are in a civilization crisis. We are really in this time of big challenge in all the world, with all the nations, in a world interdependent. But in this time, how do we manage that at Mediapart? We organize each week what we call live, that's event, which like TV show, but it's not where the politicians, sometimes, but more often, it's people from the society, from association, from organization, about the question of migrants, of refugees. We organize as Mediapart with other media from Tunisia, from Italy, from Greece, from East Europe. We organize big operation, not investigation, but that was report, that was testimony about all, and the title was Open Europe. We must be actor. Hashtag Open Europe. And we were in this battle. And I think for me, it's the time of youngness for journalism. I repeat very often that many young people, they forget Pulitzer Prize. Big story, a big guy, a big industrial, commercial success story. But at the beginning, who was Pulitzer? A migrant from a small German minority from Hungary, I think. And he arrived very young. And how he start? He start with investigative journalism. In St. Louis, Missouri, he make an investigation how the richest people pay or not their taxes. You are in a free country, you can be rich, okay, but you must pay tax. You must give them to the society. That was the first success of this guy, Pulitzer. It was in German. It was in the Weltische Post in St. Louis, Missouri. And the second example I want to give to you, it's the history of the Statue of Liberty. Even when I make a conference with American students, they don't know this story. It was given by the working people from Paris to the American people. But the New York bourgeoisie, they don't want this little revolutionary statue. She was in the dock in in New York. They don't. It was allongé.
Lying down.
Lying down. It was the New York Post, the new daily from Mr. Pulitzer. He said, okay, we will fight. This statue must be up. And he organized a subscription. He organized a very big, popular subscriptions. It's a symbol of liberty. It's a symbol of democracy. We, the people, want it will be up. Okay, it was work, a story of a business story, Mr. Pulitzer, but it was also this example that we are really a profession with our all traditional way to work, but we must think that we are also actor of the democratic challenge.
Okay, so we all believe in quality journalism. Do we believe that we should be actors as well as journalists and do publicity stunts, perhaps, like the Statue of Liberty? The final word to Alain.
I think you're asking how could we rebuild the trust. Huh? I think you already know the solution. Look at the food industry. Look at the biofood after the Matco crisis. We need now to make ourselves our own product in which we keep a whole control of it. I, in Brussels, I am milking my cow, myself producing the milk, and I'm selling it directly or offering it directly to the client. And you have a trust relation. You know where the milk is coming from, and you will accept to taste it, swallow it, because you trust me. So basically, we're changing the pattern, the economic pattern. I think nowadays, even if we have a global brand, or if we try to keep some brand, basically, we will come back to a pattern where you have a citizen journalist that is paid just to take his time to work as a citizen journalist, to feed in information that would not be Matco information to other people. That's it. And you can contest it. And there's not big investment. It's just time. It's just human resources. And one day or the other, you can say, okay, I don't want to read anymore Mediapart, Le Soir, or New York Times. You just have the choice, and you just say, I just want to know where my news food comes from directly. I want to be able to put my hand on the ass of a cow and just say the milk will come from that cow. That's it. And I think basically that's it. So that's how I will come back to the story, how we work for a few months with Mediapart. Sometimes they're giving us document. Okay, this is document that is coming from France. We want to cooperate, but we have to check. To check the document, to check everything that is surrounding that document. And they do the same. They do the same. When we said 2 weeks ago that there was a twist with the intelligence services, they checked, they called in Paris every people that could confirm or infirm the information. That's it. So let's see it as something. The new world will be a world of short link, short connection between the producer of information and the guy that accepts to read it or to be influenced or to open at least an opinion debate. Another thing, because Edoui has not talked about that. There's something very useful within the structure of Mediapart. It is called the blogs of the readers. They not only not only have the right to give a comment after the news. They are also part of the news that is disseminated within the website. That's really important. So it's not only we recreate trust. In some way, we offer some shares in the intellectual capitals of the news to the readers. And I think it's obviously the solution.
Organic farming. There we are. And what better vehicle to promote a common agricultural policy like organic news than the European Union? Thank you very much indeed for your attention. Thank you to our distinguished panel, please. Thank you.